In terms of the live action shots on like a hydraulic rig, has that been problematic to match move the harness when you're also having to create a performance around the entire thing that's happening?
So the technique around it basically involves many steps. And the idea is to continuously move with a common camera. We would start with previs. We would then lay out all those previs shots in 3D space so that we built a correct continuity over time, so that one shot matched with another shot. We would then animate that shot. We would animate those shots to about 95% completion. Those files, they would be converting that into data that the buck could understand. Well, they would have to convert that to a combination of movement on the buck, but also camera movement, because that camera movement would have to take into consideration the movement of the camera and some of the movement of the dragon that the buck is not capable of doing. Very complicated stuff. And they said, okay, so we have a project lined up for you. And they said, it's Game of Thrones. It was season 4. And I was unfamiliar with the show because I hadn't had cable for a long time. And you know what it's like when you just work and you're not really in tune with what's happening on TV. And I thought of it as almost being a bit of a demotion to go from film to TV. So I took the job. And as it turned out, they wanted me to do these skeletons coming out from under the snow and fighting some of our heroes. Some whites coming out from under the snow fighting some of these heroes. And then I realized that I was brought there by design, because this skeleton sequence was an homage to Ray Harryhausen. And Ray Harryhausen was Phil Tippett's mentor, and Phil Tippett was my hero and mentor. And now I got to work on a project which specifically was designed for my master's master. And suddenly these things take on this special meaning that you would have never appreciated. I almost said no to working on it. And as it turns out, it changed my career. The only way to survive working on Game of Thrones is that everyone puts their swords on the floor and says, how do we help each other? And so right up front, we asked Weta and Scanline, how do you want the files? How do you want them named? What's the directory structure? What supporting QuickTimes do you need? And we just did full on building tools to make that file transfer super smooth. And then once we were in production, we were delivering dozens of shots to them every day. And the idea being that once we were in the heat of battle, they could ingest our material, drop it into their world space, and that it drops in directly. Anything short of a complete collaboration would have been a disaster. That was totally impossible to do 20 years ago. Very uncommon, I guess even 5 years ago. But in order to do the I think TV is where it's at, and I think this is the way it has to be going forward. It's kind of a new way of working, and certainly one which everyone's got to try to replicate. And in some cases, we would do something in-house. We called it a super animation, which would be an animation which perhaps would be 30 or 40 seconds long, but would cover many shots. And the reason why we would do that is because it built in perfect continuity. If you look at season 8, episode 3, where Viserion and Rhaegal are having this mid-air battle over the castle, that entire fight sequence was all animated as one long super animation by our animation supervisor, Jason Snyman. He laid the whole thing out. The shots were taken 80-90% completion, and it was based on that one animation that we built a cut around it, and then we were able to divide those shots among other animators who could take that work to completion. So for us, again, it was taking these very complicated things and covering our bases by never cheating. Cheating always invites getting caught. You look at the case of the whites that are crawling up the dragon. Those whites are actually assets that came from previous seasons, and then they were modified by Weta for their needs, because they were doing a bunch of work using Massive. Took our technique, we rigged them, took our techniques, applied it to them, and we delivered the dragon and the whites back to them as caches. And since we're using the exact same assets, it all plugged right into their look dev, into their lighting, everything worked perfectly smooth. And our other partner vendor was Scanline, where they had the techniques which they were specializing in, which was making buildings collapse and explode in episode 5. But we generated all the dragon, and we sent them animation cache files, and it was all lit for those shots in their environments in a common 3D space. We all had to work as if we were one facility. So in the case of our work, half of our shots we finalized in-house, and the other half we were working with our partners, Weta and Scanline, to support their shot.